Good evening, everyone. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Porfirio Coronado, and I'm the Homeowner Services Assistant Manager. We are here today with Mr. Brandon Jones with Comerica. He's going to be presenting to us about debt management. He's also going to be touching a little bit on budgeting because you can't talk about debt without talking about budgeting. So today we have the pleasure of having a wonderful presenter. You are going to enjoy the information that he's going to bring us. Mr. Brandon Jones. Hello, Mr. Brandon.
All right, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to work with you all over at Habitat. You all have the most amazing people who are in your program. And so we at Comerica are always really happy to just really be a part of you all's mission and to be a part of your programming. And also to celebrate, this is financial education, financial literacy month. So we are super excited. This is the Super Bowl for us community people who teach financial education. And so without further ado, I'm going to jump into it. So as stated, I'm going to go through two separate presentations. And one is going to be on debt management, but I feel like we can't have a really comprehensive conversation about debt management if we also don't talk about budgeting, right? Because how are you going to reduce debt if you don't know what you have in your budget, right? Or how to budget. And so we'll go through debt management first, and we'll kind of talk through all of the different components of debt and some terminology that goes along with debt, kind of what is debt. And then we'll go into a kind of a tips of how you would build a good comprehensive budget. And then at the end, I'll also show you like a budgeting tool, and I'll present you with that budgeting tool as well. So if you have any questions, as you can see, I'm not some old stuffy banker. And so if you would just put your questions in the chat, I'll try to do my best to see them and to get them addressed. But please feel free at any point to put your questions in the chat. I'll try to make it through these fairly quickly, and then so we have some good Q&A time at the end as well. All right. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. We're going to jump into the debt management portion of the presentation now. So give me 1 second. I also want to put up the chat on a separate screen. I'm working with two different screens here. So give me a
I'll get you on the chat. Don't worry.
Oh, you got me. Okay,
Yeah.
Perfect. So let me go ahead and start here. So to introduce myself formally, my name is Brandon Q. Jones. I'm the External Affairs Market Manager for Texas. And so in my job, I get to interface with our nonprofit communities and with our CDCs and CDFIs and the community, and really leverage the bank's resources in community. So whether that looks like philanthropic give or it looks like intellectual, like some give and property and support of programming like we're doing now through volunteerism, right? So we're going to start off with just kind of the basic, like what is debt, right? What's the difference between debt and credit, right? People often get those and they think that they're interchangeable terms, but they're not. So debt is the money that you owe, and credit is the ability to borrow money. You can use credit to borrow money, which then becomes debt, right? And so think of it as your credit card is credit, right? Let's just use a credit card, for example. But as soon as you swipe that credit card, you now have debt. You now owe the company that has extended you credit, right? And debtors and credit. So what are the creditors? So what are the difference between a creditor and a debtor? Because a lot of times the terms are used interchangeably. So debtors owe money, they borrowed it. And creditors and lenders loan the money. So I am a debtor because I have a mortgage, but Comerica is the creditor because they've extended me credit for my mortgage. So just think of it like that. We're debtors if we have any type of debt, and the people who extend us that debt are called creditors, right? So understanding your debt. So kind of what you need to know. You kind of need to understand some different aspects of debt, especially if you're looking to tackle it. And these things are oftentimes out there in your credit report that you can pull as well. But you need to understand who you owe, right? A good listing of who you owe, who you have mortgages with or installment loans. And we'll talk through these different types of loans here before the end of this presentation, but kind of who you owe and how much you owe them, right? How much the payments are and when the payments are due, and other important factors about your debt. And this is important also for the second session. You really need to have a really strong grasp on your debt before you go to create a budget, right? Because if you're creating a budget, you need to understand who you owe, right? And so this is the first step I do sometimes. I've done it with a few people, should I say, where we walk through kind of creating a budget. And the first thing I tell them, hey, before we sit down and create a budget, you need to understand what you owe, when you owe it, payment frequency, and all of that, right? You can't put together a comprehensive budget without understanding what your bills are, or what your debts are. So people get into debt for many reasons. I think we're all in debt at this point. I sit in debt, I drive in debt, right? I have a car that I have a loan on, I have a mortgage, right? And I have some debt in my pocket with some credit cards. Hopefully that goes away soon. But people get into debt for many reasons, right? To purchase assets. So that looks like cars, homes, right? Things that are really large purchases that you don't necessarily have all the money up front for, right? To pay bills as a result of not paying them. And so sometimes people actually resort to using their credit cards to pay their everyday living expenses, which is not typically recommended, but hey, we've all been there where times have been hard. So to cover unexpected expenses or emergencies. And so this could look like medical debt, right? When you've had an unexpected medical emergency, or, something just happens, you got to fix an AC around your home, you had a flat tire, right? Or they bought something that they wanted or that they needed, right? And so you saw something and you really needed your refrigerator clunked out. I don't know, or it was clunking out and you need to buy a new refrigerator. Or you saw a new pair of Jordans and you paid for them. That's what's on my credit card, right? I really wanted some taxis, so I bought some new Jordans. But people go into debt for different reasons. And it's whatever you choose, but those are kind of the reasons why people go into debt, right? So let's talk about how debt works. So we'll go through some various lingo here that is oftentimes associated with a certain type of debt, and then we will actually go through in a moment here and to kind of break down these terms and to define them a little bit more. So debt lingo number one. So a loan with collateral that the lender can take if the loan is not prepaid according to the loan agreement. Oh, this is actually a answer the question type thing, but I'll answer it for you. So a loan with collateral that the lender can take if the loan is not prepaid according to the loan agreement. And so that's going to be a principal or a secured loan. So a secured loan is basically what this is saying. You have to present collateral in order to get that loan. And if you do not repay that loan or you do not meet your loan obligation, then your collateral will be taken. And so that may look like a car, right? Or a home. And if you don't pay your mortgage, then foreclosure will happen and the asset is now owned by the bank. So it's backed by some sort of collateral, okay? Debt lingo too, how much money you borrow. That's gonna be always your principal, right? So there's a amount that you borrow, which is the floor. So if you go to the bank and you say, hey, I need a $10,000 loan, that's going to be the principal of the loan, right? That's the money that you take away and you put in your pocket. And interest and fees are things that we tack on to them to make money, right? Or the cost of the extension of the loan. But how much money you basically, or the basic amount that you borrow, is always going to be your principal. And you'll see this if you ever go out and you apply for a loan. There's going to be what we call internally the truth in lending page. And on that page, you'll see a complete breakdown of kind of what you borrow. This is like a federal regulation. So it has to be on every single loan that goes out everywhere. But it'll break down, it'll have little boxes at the top. And in one box, it'll say principal. And then in another box, it'll say maybe like your rate. And it'll say like your annual percentage rate. And then it may have like, if it's a term loan, the term as well, right? So you'll kind of see this lingo on that truth in lending page, right? The cost of borrowing money. So we just talked about this. It's B, interest, right? And so that's going to be what the bank or the financial institution or the lender tax on to your principal so that they can make money from the loan, okay? A credit agreement that allows you to borrow money from time to time up to a pre-approved maximum credit line. And that's going to be a revolving credit. So that's pretty much like a credit card. And that looks like you're extended an amount of credit, and you use a little bit, you pay it back, and you use a little bit, and you pay it back. And so hence the term revolving. It kind of is a cyclical motion of credit. You use a little bit, you pay it back, you use a little bit, you pay it back, and it looks like it's revolving in and out, right? And so that's going to be considered as a revolving credit line, also known as a credit card or a line of credit. And the total cost of credit on a yearly basis. So I alluded to this earlier. It's going to be your annual percentage rate. So we call this in the industry the true cost of the loan. So sometimes you will see where it'll say the rate and it'll say the APR or the annual percentage rate. You always want to go by the annual percentage rate because that factors in the rate, the interest rate, but then it also tax on any applicable fees that go along with it, right? And so that's actually how much the loan is truly going to cost you at the end of the year. So that's the most important number to pay attention to. All right, when you borrow a specific amount of money and repay it over a period of time, that's gonna be an installment loan. That's C. It's not like a revolving line where it's just there. You never really, as you know, on the credit card, you can have a credit card for 10 years. You can just use a little bit, pay it back, use a little bit. But with an installment loan, it's a little bit different. Basically, you're given whatever upfront, right? Let's just say the loan amount of a mortgage, $100,000 and $200,000, right? And they say, okay, well, you're going to start paying it back every month on the first for 30 years. And you have a 30-year amortization of a loan. That's an installment loan. It's literally paid in installments. And so once you start paying it on a regular basis, it eats away at that principal, and then you will eventually get to the point where you'll pay the loan completely off. So that's a C installment. And a loan with no collateral is an unsecured loan. It's not backed by any collateral. It's just an open line of credit, like a credit card, or if you're a business owner, sometimes an open line of credit. So let's kind of jump into those to be a little bit more specific, and then we can walk through. With installment loans, they're typically going to have a principal, the amount that you borrow, and then a term, how long you have to repay the principal and pay the interest. Generally same amount every month unless there's a variable or adjustable rate. And so when you get a 30-year fixed or any type of a fixed, let's just say mortgage product, and I know that you all are going to have a class on home buying hereafter, but you will see there that there's, if it says fixed, then that means you're going to pay the exact same amount on your mortgage for however long you have that mortgage, whether it be 15 years or 30 years. But we do have some adjustable rate mortgages that are still out there, and they may adjust at 5 years. So for so many, it may say a 5 or 7 year ARM, adjustable rate mortgage, and you'll pay the same amount for 5 years, but then after 5 years, it'll change. The payment may go up, it could go down. It's typically going to go up and it'll balloon, right? So make sure that you pay attention to that when you're first signing up for your loan. Revolving credit, your credit limit is going to be the most that you can borrow. So if you have a credit card, you first open it, you have a credit card with a limit of $2,000. $2,000 is the most that you can spend on your credit card. Your payment is going to be based for a revolving line a little bit differently, because it's not going to be the exact same payment every month, because you're not necessarily eating away at it, but your payment is going to be based on the amount that you've used. And so you're typically only required to make a minimum payment, and it just depends on the credit card issuer. It's going to be about anywhere from 1% to 5% of the outstanding balance of the card. So the higher the balance on your credit card, the more your minimum payment is going to be. The less of a balance on your credit card, the less of a minimum payment that you're going to have. So if you pay more, you pay off sooner, you pay less interest, right, with credit cards. And so try not to carry huge balances on your credit card, because the longer that they kind of sit there, the more interest is accrued on those cards. And fees, everybody has a fee attached to something, right? And so these are additional charges, but they're not interest. So for example, if you've ever gone through the mortgage situation, the mortgage to obtaining a mortgage, you'll see that there are a lot of fees associated with the mortgage. So for example, yeah, you have the principal and you'll have whatever your mortgage interest rate is. But if it's like a first mortgage, you may have something like title fees, right? Where they've gone through and done a title search on your loan, or you may have an appraisal fee where somebody else had to come out to appraise your home. And then sometimes they even roll in the fees where they come out and they do an inspection. You may pay the inspection up front, but then sometimes they may be able to roll in that inspection fee to your mortgage. So those are fees typically to be charged one time, but then some loans have fees that are charged on an annual basis, right? So you just want to make sure and understand all of the fees associated. Like I said, every lender will have a truth in lending sheet that kind of details all interest rates and fees and everything. And I do suggest that you read thoroughly through that page before you sign up for any type of credit, right? Because you are in the driver's seat here, you're the consumer, and you have the right to tell people no. Like, I don't think that's a fair credit. I don't think that this is a fair credit deal, and go somewhere else. Banks are on every corner, financiers are on every corner. You literally have that power to say no, but you have to read through. And I always tell people, read through the fees and understand what you're getting yourself into. Prepayment. So that's pretty much early payment of all or part of the loan. And then it reduces interest costs because, of course, you're eating the principal down faster. And it may mean an earlier payoff date. Always ask if there are fees for prepayment, because sometimes you have some lenders that'll say, if you pay us back early, that's great, we won't charge you. But then some lenders may say, well, we were expecting to make a certain amount of interest over 15 years. You paid us back in 7. And because you did that, we're losing the additional 8 years of interest. And so because of that, you have to pay us a fee, right? So look at and make sure that you understand prepayment fees and penalties, because sometimes hopefully when you get a loan, wherever you get a loan at in life, by the time you end the loan, you'll have increased your net worth or your income, right? And so you may be able to pay off that loan a little bit faster. So really understand that before you get into any type of loan situation, all right? So let's look at reducing debt. So there are a couple of strategies that you can use for reducing debt. It just really depends on what works best for you. Either way, you're reducing your debt. I'm happy when people use either one of these. So we have what we call the high cost debt first method. That's where you pay off debt with the highest cost to you first. And then we also have the snowball method, where you pay off the debt with the lowest balance, right? There are pros and cons to both of them, and then we'll kind of walk through, but you get to decide. But either way, you're paying off your debt, right? So use one of the two strategies. So the high cost debt first method. With this one, the advantage is you save money. However, the disadvantage is it feels like it's a much slower process, right? So what you would do in this method is that you would get all of your debts and you would list them from highest to lowest. And when we mean highest to lowest, we mean in terms of interest rate, typically. So some people do it via interest rate and some people do it at the amount that they owe, but you're looking at the largest loan, typically the most expensive loan, down to your cheapest loan. You would pay the amount due on each of them as stated, right? But then you would make an extra payment to that first debt that's on your list. So you have to keep your regular payment schedule, but then in addition to you paying your regular payment schedule, you would then go ahead and make an extra payment to that largest debt, right? After you pay off the first debt, then you're going to go to the next debt on the list and do the same thing, make the regular payment and an extra payment until you pay it off. So you can see how it feels a little bit longer, and you'll just continue until all of your debts have been paid off. This saves you much more money in the long run because you're going to be paying off those high cost, those high interest debts first. So the second one is the snowball method. This is actually the method that I use personally to pay off debt. I had to go in and I made tons of mistakes, right? And I had to go in and pay off debt my own self, right? And so this is the method that felt good to me because I love to achieve goals. And so for me, I did this. And so I listed my debts from the smallest debts to the largest debts, right? And I paid off the smallest one first. And then once I got that one scratched off, I had like a little board on the wall and I would scratch it off and I would see that whole debt completed. And then I went on to the next debt and the next debt, right? So the advantage here is that it makes the progress feel faster, but in the end, you may end up paying more money, right? Because you're not necessarily reducing the high interest debt. You're not reducing the high interest debt as you would in the aforementioned method. So in this process, you would list the debts, the lowest debts to the highest debts, right? And then you would make your amount, you would make your regular payment on that lowest debt, but then you would also make an additional payment to that debt. And then once you pay off that smallest debt, that's gone from your debt report, from your credit report, then you move on to the next one and you kind of do the same. As you can see, and then also with this one, you end up paying, if you have a little bit of, if you have little bitty debts everywhere or things that you owe or, you know, little mistakes that you've made, this actually helps you to clear a lot of items off of your credit report a little bit faster than if you kind of use the reverse method where you're kind of tackling that biggest thing first. So just something to play with. Either way, I think they're both really effective methods and they can both help you to wipe off some debt, all right? So where do you get help? You want to go to nonprofit counseling organizations like Habitat. There are many across the city that will kind of help you through this process of understanding debt. You can go to USA.gov and search credit counseling, and there are a lot of resources out there as well that are backed by the feds, okay? So choose your help carefully, right? Debt settlement companies, they often try to make deals with your creditors, and you might want to ask about these things up front, right? And so you'll see them on the TV all the time. They're like, oh, you have a lot of debt, give us a call and we'll take care of it. Well, pretty much what they're doing is that they'll call and make deals on your behalf with your creditors. And then what they may do is they may even roll in the second part here, which is debt consolidation loan. Once they've gone in and they settle all of your debts out for you, they'll create kind of a loan and then pay everything off. And then you pay them back, right? These are all things that you can actually do on your own, right? You don't need to necessarily pay the fees because there are going to be fees attached to it. It's not a free service, right? And so these are things that you can actually do on your own and save a lot of money. You can call and you can make offers with your creditors yourself and not pay any fees. Debt consolidation loans, basically that's kind of when you, and then you can also do these on the side, right? You don't necessarily have to go through a debt settlement company or a program to do a debt consolidation loan. So debt consolidation loan looks like taking out one big loan and paying off everything that you owe, right? Only thing about that, you have to be really financially responsible, right? Because you can use this big new loan, pay off everything, and then now you owe this one big loan, but you can't go back and start using the credit cards that you paid off, right? So you have to be very responsible if you're choosing to do a debt consolidation loan because you can find yourself doubly in debt, all right? So this section is going to talk about non-payment of debts and debts in collection. So kind of looking at the life cycle of a debt. So let's just say you take on debt, you pay on time and as agreed, everything is current and you pay the debt off. That's the ideal way of kind of paying a debt. But however, life happens and we all make mistakes. And so this cycle might happen where you take on debt and you miss payments or things become delinquent, you fall into default, and then there's a default period, and then you'll fall into charge off. And that's when they'll hit your credit. Well, it'll start showing in default and missed payments on your credit report, but then you fall into what's called charge off status, which means that the company has literally wrote the debt off because they're not been able to collect it from you. And then it goes into collection. Some collection company may come in and buy it, and it's typically assigned or sold to a debt collector. And so that's when you'll start kind of receiving those phone calls. So not paying your debt. So what can happen if you don't pay your debts on time or as agreed, right? So several things. late fees and more interest may accrue on those payments. You will get contacted by your debt collector. Losing services or paying costs to reestablish them. So let's just say if this is like a electric bill or a utility bill, that may look like them discontinuing service, and then also losing collateral, right? So if you've gotten a loan for a car, then if you don't pay the car note, then the car could be taken away, right? Because it's used as collateral. What else could happen? Of course, negative interest on your credit report. Anytime you go past 30 days of making a payment late, it's going to be reported on your credit report. Of course, that's going to be a drop in your credit report and your credit score. And then also, potential lawsuits from creditors, wage garnishment and account garnishment, all of those things, but you don't want to get that far down the road. So before making a plan to pay a debt, make sure you know a few things. So let's just say you owe a debt. I always say, go and call the creditor and let them know what you can do. And they're going to have to accept it. If you have lost your job or you falling yourself on hard times, it's always good just to call the creditor and say, hey, I know what I would typically owe you all, but at this point, I literally can't make that payment, but I do want to, in good faith, make some payment toward my debt. I can only give you X per month, right? Or X per this period, right? And they, got to kind of work with you. Think about it as if you had a friend that owed you money, let's just say they owed you like $100. Would you be okay? Yeah, you may want the $100 back, like they said they were going to pay it back all at once. But they may call you and say, hey, I can only give you $10 a month every pay period. You're probably going to take the $10, right? Because your $10 is better than nothing. So the credit companies often view it that way as well. But you'll need to know the debt that you owe, the statute of limitations has not expired, and that you're dealing with a legitimate debt collector, right? There are a lot of scams going on where, folks are claiming to be debt collectors and they really are not. So the first place you would want to check to see all of this information is your credit report, because things are going to be pretty accurate on your credit report in terms of who's collected the debt or how the debt has been sold or moved from one place to another. And if you do have any doubts about where your debt lies now, you can call the original debtor and ask them, hey, I had a loan with you all. They keep the information on file. Who did you all sell my debt to? I want to make sure that I'm going into repayment with the correct debtor at this point, or collection agency with this point. All right. So if payment in full is not possible, set up a payment plan. Like I said, make sure it's something that you can afford, right? And so we'll talk about that in the budget a little bit, and negotiate a lower balance. And so ask for a paid in full and not settled. Those are two different terms. And they mean two different things, right? So paid in full means that you paid your obligation on time and as agreed, right? And then settled just kind of means that, hey, these people paid me back, but they didn't necessarily pay back the whole thing. And so a paid in full actually weighs a lot more than a settled. And so when you are negotiating these things on your credit report, please ask for a paid in full letter or a paid in full agreement, especially if you've gone through those debt paid off methods. As I was going through them and repaying debt, I was saying to the creditors, okay, upon my last payment, I really need a paid in full letter. And I would ask, like, can you email me and mail me one? Just because I really wanted to make sure that that was on file so that could be deleted from my credit report, okay? So debt collectors have to follow the rules. Don't feel like harassed or as if you don't have rights when dealing with debt collectors. People can't be abusive or unfair or deceptive in their practices. And they can't do things like call you at your job or threaten you with violence or use vulgar or obscene language. They also can't call you at inconvenient times as well. And there are some rights out there. If you go back to that, the governmental site I mentioned earlier, there are some rules that apply to debt collectors that they have to follow. If they're not, then there are ways in which you can file complaints against debt collectors who are being abusive in their practices to recollect money. All right, so that ends this first presentation. So are there any questions in the chat before I move on to the very brief kind of budgeting section?
Yes, we do have two questions, Brandon.
Okay.
One question is, let's see. It says, does paying off negative items on your credit report, does that increase your credit score?
Yes. And so once you pay them off and they're settled, I'm sorry, not settled, paid in full, and you receive your paid in full letter, then you'll go in and sometimes the creditors will be like, oh, we'll report it. They typically won't. You have to take care of it yourself. But then what you'll do is you can go on to the 3 credit reporting bureaus. You can dispute the item from your credit report at that point. Then you would submit as documentation that paid in full letter. So it's kind of saying, hey, I paid this off, paid it in full. And then at that point, you can ask for a deletion from your credit report. And then upon that deletion, you should see a boost in your credit score.
Awesome, thank you. Now, another question that we had in the chat was, if fees are included in your mortgage, does that mean that you're also paying interest on those fees?
Yes. So, I mean, some fees you just can't get around. Like you can't get around the title fee. Like they have to literally go and pull the title on your mortgage to make sure it's a clean mortgage. And some mortgage companies' fees are not as high as others, and I'm pretty sure you all will probably cover these types of fees in your mortgage training. So just kind of be aware. Some stuff you can maybe pay for out of pocket, like the inspection fee, and those are some things that you can shop around for. Some fees you can reduce if you do some due diligence. So for example, I went, my realtor and I were working together, and we found an inspection company that charged a whole lot less than, you know, who the mortgage company was trying to charge me. And so that saved me some hundreds of dollars, right? So sometimes you can play with those fees and get some things done on your own. And then sometimes it's just standard with that mortgage company or with that lender.
Right, which is always great for you to, before you sign any loan document, you will get an estimate of those fees on your loan estimate. To your point, in there it would say a section that says items that you can shop for, and it will list those items that you are able to shop for, such as the appraisal, such as like your title policy. So those are items that some of the items that you're able to shop for. So yeah, so take note on that. Another question that Mr. Demiki was asking is that, what if a debt collector refuses to agree to a payment that you are able to afford?
Well, so it's being recorded, and I believe that there is some protection out there with like debt collectors. And I'll have to go in and do that research and send it back to you, because it's something I believe you can go into litigation about. Because if you can't pay it, you can't pay it. And you did call them a good faith to kind of say, and I want to say, because I don't want to ever speak out of turn, but I did think that there was some like regulation or something that was passed that where it had to work with people if they called in good faith. But don't quote me on that. I'll do the research and get it back to you.
Yes. Yeah. As soon as I will get it to me, then I'll get it, pass it over to you, to Mr. Demiki. Another question that we have from Ms. White is, what is the process when a creditor refuses to remove items from your credit? And when it's found when it's actually found that it's a fraudulent charge?
If the fraudulent charge, so you have to go into the various credit reporting agencies where you see the fraudulent charges, and then they have a special process for fraud. And so once you go to Experian, let's just say .com, you log in, and then you'll go through a dispute process, and then you'll still do a dispute, but then you'll do a fraud dispute. And that's a completely different set of, that's a whole different procedure than if you're trying to clear it off because you did owe the debt, you paid it off. That's something a little bit different. And so there are some additional steps there and some additional documentation that you will have to provide to the credit bureaus and agencies. Because if they're not believing you, then you have to kind of go over their head and just go to the credit bureau and dispute it with them. But then they may ask for a lot of additional kind of documentation before they can remove that. But you'll have to go to the credit bureaus.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions, drop them in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as we can. All right, we can go ahead and start with the next one.
Okay, so let me go back to sharing my screen here. Give me a second. Good questions, y'all. Keep them
good questions, exactly.
All right, so this is a workshop that we love to do. It's called 10 Tips Towards Budgeting Success for financial budgeting, 10 budgeting tips for financial success. All right, so when setting up your budget, you really want to be realistic about your budget. If you've never made a budget before, you need to start by thinking of how much money you will have coming in every month and how much you think you'll be spending, right? The more realistic you are about these numbers, the more likely you are to stick to your budget. And by realistic, I mean for real deal realistic. And so you'll need to kind of map out and understand, like I was saying earlier, what debt you owe, what bills you pay every month, and be very realistic about this. This seems to be a really scary process for some people, especially if they've just let their finances roll, right? And so have everything ready to go when you are creating this budget, right? Because you want it to be, like it says, realistic, but you want it to work, right? It's a tool to help you be a little bit more financially fit. So you need to differentiate between your needs and your wants in a budget. So this is if money is tight. If you're going in to do a budget, typically money is tight or you've mismanaged it at some point. And so differentiating between your needs and your wants can help you stay within your budget. So of course, your needs are going to come first, right? So needs are shelter and clothes, but not necessarily like Ralph Lauren, but like a shirt, right? So your needs are going to come first, right? And then with whatever money you have left over, then you can go and get some wants, right? So make sure that you have a clear understanding of those things, because that even very, very tenured adults tend to not sometimes have a grasp, right? I really like this one. Guess half of your income and guess low for your income and half of your expenses. So in addition to guessing low for your income, guess half of your expenses, this too will give you some wiggle room in your budget. And so with some people, if they can, let's just say if you bring home in a budget period $3,275, are you able to budget to $2,000? I'm sorry, are you able to budget to $3,000 and leave the $275 out? Or are you able to budget to $3,200 and leave the $75 out? That $75 may give you a lot of wiggle room, or it may be there for some emergency, but always underestimate the income and then overestimate for expenses. And so, for example, your light bill, right? That's something that does fluctuate for us, especially in the summer here in Texas. And so if you think your light bill, typically it's coming out of the 100, but then you might want to put some wiggle room in there and say, you know what, I think I'm going to budget for $125, right? At least you have budgeted more than what you may owe, but it's better on the debt side or on your bill side to have a little bit more in your budget than to have a deficit, right? To where you can't pay the actual bill. You always want to include a miscellaneous category in your budget. As you know, life happens and things come up and tires blow and brakes give out and things happen, right? You look up something, if you own a house, something breaks like every day. And so this adds a bit more flexibility in your budget, and it helps to ensure that you've not omitted something from your calculation and that you won't go over your budget. So this provides you with a little bit more of that wiggle room that we talked about earlier, especially with bills that change on a monthly basis. So people don't think to do this sometimes, but include your savings as an expense in the budget, right? And think of it as you are an expense. Your savings is for you. This is how you pay yourself. And so you are a bill. Think of yourself as a bill, or think of yourself as a part of the debt category. You are an expense, and so you need to save for yourself. Decide on an amount that you'd like to save every month and include it as an expense in your budget, right? Or I'm sorry, this says ask your parents, but I did this for kids last week, but set up a separate savings account that you can transfer or deposit your money into every month. And so for me, my savings is at a credit union. And it's because I can't get to the credit union, to be very honest with you. And so for me to go and pull my money out of that credit union, I literally have to get in the car and go to the credit union because I don't have the debit card or anything. And so that is a true emergency fund. If I need it, I'll go over there. And I think that's a really good tip for some people. Typically, if we can't get to the money, if it's not easily accessible, then we tend to actually only use it for like true real life emergencies. Your savings can be used for different types of goals, right? Long-term goals, or short-term goals. And like I said, I'm sorry, y'all, forgot to edit this. I did it for young adults, but short-term goals. And that can be something like you want to save up for a new appliance or something smaller, and then long-term goals like, oh, you're saving for a home, right? Or you're saving for your kids' college expenses. This money could just also be used for emergencies, right? It's been talked about here a lot lately that if people could just save the $400, it would save. It would actually, if you had $400, $400 emergency could actually throw you way off base, right? And so if people could just save $400 and have that there for emergencies, it would prevent kind of that snowball effect that it causes when you do have an emergency and you don't have money and you have to dip into payday loans or something like that, right? So I always say just have some money around, not necessarily for a goal, but just for an emergency, because we know that those are going to happen. Align your budget with your goals and your values. So once you've completed your budget, you need to study it and see if you're spending your money in alignment with your values and your goals, those long and short-term goals. A budget is a living document, you all. It's not something that you create in January and you think it's going to live all year. That's not how this goes. You go in and you review your budget at least every month. If you get paid every 2 weeks, then you probably need to rebudget every 2 weeks, right? That's what I do. I sit down on payday and I go through my budget and make sure all of my things are paid. And I literally use a budget, and I have a budget tool that I'm going to provide you all with at the end of this. But it's a really good exercise because you really get to kind of see the ebbs and flows of money, because things are not the same every month, right? Things fluctuate. Something pops up on your cell phone bill. Like I was checking my cell phone bill this month when I was doing my budget, and I saw like an extra $20 or $40 or something. I was like, what is this? And so I had to go study the bill because I knew that wasn't supposed to be there. And it was for a repair that I had done to a broken screen on my phone, but I did the repair back in January, but for some reason it just hit this billing cycle, right? And so it helps you to kind of really understand where your money is going, but it's a living document. Don't do it and throw it in the corner. Literally engage your budget, change it, see where the changes are, see where you need to move some things around, and really begin to study it. And once you begin to do it, it does that muscle memory thing where you automatically on payday sit down, do your budget, right? And so that's why I always tell folks, if you're having trouble doing the budget, just know, hey, it's payday. You typically are feeling really good on payday. Sit down and do your budget then. Give yourself that time to get it done, and you'll see that after doing it so many times, you will almost feel anxiety that you didn't do it, because you'll feel like, oh my gosh, am I here being irresponsible and I don't know where my money is going, right? So if you're having difficulty sticking to a budget, you may be overspending on things that aren't really aligned with your goals, and so you can always go in and reallocate the budget. So keep all of your bills and receipts organized. Make sure that you have them filed away, whether it is a physical copy of your bills or a digital copy, because you're always able to kind of go back and refer to previous bills. That's how I knew that there was something up with my phone bill, my cell phone bill, because I was like, number one, I knew how much I was supposed to pay every month. But then also I had to go back and refer to other bills to make sure that that line item wasn't there. And that's how I found that line item for this current month, right? And it also just makes it easier when you're doing things like taxes, or you need to just refer to some bills for some reason. Make sure that you keep a good track of those things, right? I talked about this earlier, but review and recalculate the budget, right? It's gonna change, and you have to ask yourself these questions. Where did I overspend? Where did I save? What can I do differently next month, right, to reach my goals in that budget? You want to do this over and over again. It's a living document. Like I said, it's not something that should be collecting dust. You should go back and actually you start a new budget every month, right? You go in because you're going to be making more money. And typically if you make more money, your bills increase. Hopefully they don't, but they always do, because we find ourselves spending more when we make more, right? Or seasons change and certain bills are more in certain seasons or less in certain seasons, right? And so this should be something that you always kind of going back and reviewing. Now, a lot of people use this envelope method, and I love it, especially for when I'm traveling, I'm on vacation. But pay cash for small expenses. when we're using our debit cards, you don't see that money leaving, right? That money just leaves the account, and you look up and you're like, oh man, I've overspent. And so if you're really putting yourself on a strict budget, it's sometimes good to kind of have cash for those small expenses. Or if you allocated, let's just say $100 a week this month for, let's just say, lunch or whatever the case may be, sometimes it's good to just have that amount in cash, and you can literally see those bills leaving your wallet, and you actually spend a lot slower when you have cash than if you've had a debit card, if you're spending it from a credit card, right? And allow yourself space for mistakes and to learn from them. It's okay. You're gonna screw up the budget. You're not gonna meet the budget goal this month. You may not save as much as you need to, and that's okay. Dust yourself off, get up, try again. You got a next budget. You got a new paycheck next month. You got a new budget. But at some point, you're gonna fall off the budget. Like even the most disciplined of people fall off their budget sometimes, right? But that's okay. Get back on the saddle and get to riding, and get yourself on track as soon as possible and get it done, right? That's kind of my best advice. So people always ask about, well, I don't really do well. And some people do well with writing the budget by hand. Like some people are just handwritten people. Half of my budget is by hand. Half of my budget is in an Excel spreadsheet. Super weird, but that's Brandon's system. Some people really like budgeting apps. And so I would first say check with your various financial institutions. Whoever you bank with, the bank's online systems now are like super robust and oftentimes come with budgeting apps that you can use. So tap into that at your local institution. Pocket Guard, Mint is going to make you feel extra bad. Mint logs into your bank account and will literally tell you, you've been eating out too much. You're not doing this, you're not doing that. But it is a flawless system that will really help you keep track of a budget and really help you to achieve your financial goals. Also here, and I'm going to put the link to this in the website and the chat here, if it will open. But I actually have a link to a.
I'll drop it off in there.
Okay, so I'll get it put out there and I'll get it sent out to you all. But I actually have a link to a actual live budget, and this one you can kind of plug and play with, and when I get it out here, I'll send it out. But it's a link to an actual budget where you can plug and play. But if you're just trying to find a basic household budget, you can literally go to Google and say basic household budget. I believe even in Microsoft Word, if you go into the templates, there's a budget template in Microsoft Word where you can go through and create a household budget. But wherever you do it, whether it's by paper, by hand, through Excel, through an app, just do a budget, right? I'm gonna tell you, it'll make all the difference in you keeping track of your debt, keeping track of your expenses, and making sure that you're staying on course with your spending and your savings, all right? So that's all I have tonight, you all. Did I make it under an hour? I did. Like I have a few more minutes. So do we have any questions?
You're good. You're good. That's fine. All right. So one question from Ms. Price is asking, are there any budgeting apps that that anyone can use for free?
Yeah, I believe Mint is still free. The ones at your bank are typically going to be free because you're a customer there. There could be some fees associated. And so just kind of go out there in the app store or just kind of Google budgeting apps, and then they'll have them out there. But be really careful about, somebody said, yes, Mint is free. And I trust Mint because Mint is through Intuit. And Intuit is a company that has a really high security rating because some of these apps will log back into your bank account and then they can kind of see all of your transactions. So you're feeding your bank account information into these apps. And so Mint is one of the more long running and trusted ones because it is backed by Intuit.
Awesome. What other questions do you have regarding debt management or budgeting? There's a question out there.
And I have I'm going to drop it here in the chat for you all. And let me see here.
Ms. Francis does not use any app. She uses a notebook. Like, again,
do it. Yeah. As long as you can, I'm here for it, Esperanza. As long as you can document the budget and pay all the bills on time and you can list it out, use a notebook, right? But I did and I could go back to sharing my screen here since we have a couple of more minutes, but when we're doing online worksheets, I don't, for some reason, I just really like this one. This is how I fashioned my personal budget from this budget here. And this is what I just put into the chat. But this is Kiplinger's, their household budget worksheet. And what I love here is that it kind of takes you through the different components of a budget. So your income, your loans, or all of your debts are listed here, your utilities, insurance premium. It literally has everything listed. But then also what it'll show here, oh wait, I'm not sharing my screen. And so what it will also show here on this worksheet is kind of your total income, and they'll deduct your expenses, and they'll give you kind of a number at the end. And hopefully this number will be 0, or you will have a surplus at the end of your budget. But it's completely customizable. So for example, let's just say you want to add a row here. Yeah, let's add it there. So, oh wait, let's just say here, right? So in your savings and investments, let's just say you wanted to add, for example, a vacation fund. So you can do that here. And then, for example, if you then need college savings, like you don't have any kids, or you don't have a need to do an IRA, though it's highly suggested, but you didn't want to put those, all of these sections here are customizable. And then also what you can do at the end, if you click download here, it will download your whole budget over into an Excel spreadsheet that you can have and that you can refer to on a monthly basis. And so I've done this, downloaded it, put it over into an Excel spreadsheet. I actually put some formulas in there and did some other things. But this is kind of the basic template that I use for my budgeting. And I really like it because like I said, it's highly customizable, and you're able to kind of download it and send it over to an Excel spreadsheet if you are proficient in Excel. And I'll put that in the chat for everyone.
Yeah, that is great information. If you didn't get it in there, I would drop the link again, just so that you all can have it as an extra resource for anyone looking for a template to create a budget, right? And like Brandon said, it's like a budget that works for you, right? As long as you are doing it, right? Brandon's budget and my budget is not the same, right? So it's going to be a budget that is going to be individualized for yourself, because again, it's for you. Okay, so whatever works for you, if it's bi-weekly, weekly, whatever, whenever you get paid, as long as you do a budget that is that you're able to stick to, then that's the one that works for you. But what other questions do you have? Let's see.
Got it. It's in the chat, Deetra.
Yes.
Also, I want to put my email address here for anybody that wants to reach out. Some people reach out and say, hey, we want to bank with you all. Not selling the bank. But some people do want to come and they want to, hey, we like Comerica. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not a banker, but I'll get you with one. Or some people just need advice on certain things, or they want to know APR, loan prices, or any of this goodness. Putting my email address out here in the chat as well. You can always reach out if you have any questions or concerns.
Right. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for taking some time and facilitating this for us.